you're going to have problems, especially when you try to take out Shelley Silver and Joe Bruno on your first day. I was in I'll tell you an interesting anecdote. I was at a Denny Farrell fundraiser. I go upstairs to the VIP reception, and there's Shelley and Spitzer having it out over the eventual DiNapoli selection for controller. That day, Spitzer put out 3 gubernatorial, 3 candidates for controller. Shelley was arguing, give me any member of the assembly, and you can have your choice, you know. And Spitzer said, Shelley, you don't understand that tomorrow I have the New York Times editorial and every other editorial in the state. He's leaving the room. Spitzer's leaving the room, going downstairs. I'm walking with him, and he said, you know, Shelley just doesn't understand. I have all the papers. And I said, I turned around to him, I said, Shelley doesn't care. You know, he's only worried about his members. I just don't think that Eliot was politically attuned to these things. Bruno was going to take care of himself. He wanted to get rid of Bruno. Bruno was already under investigation. I think that's, you know, that's part of it. You can't take on the 2 other men in the room and, you know, and think that you're going to get an agenda passed. He was only going to create turmoil. Once you do that, once you start off as badly as he did with the other powers in Albany, you're doomed to at least a bad year, maybe a bad term, and you know, and that's part of it. You know, the other part of it, of course, is he didn't have a real structure in place, you know, for picking his people. Yet I thought he had a terrible transition period, where he should have been thinking about an agenda, should have been thinking about his people, and he just didn't.
Yes, if you don't mind, I'll put the mic up a little bit closer.
I really like that anecdote. It speaks volumes. I guess there's so many things you could talk about that went wrong the first year. I think the biggest one is one that anecdote illustrated, is that he didn't fully appreciate what being governor meant. There's something I remember reading about when I was a kid, the Peter Principle. This is that you within an organization, you rise to the level of your incompetence. You do really well, you get promoted. You do well at that job, you get promoted again, until you come to a job that you can't do well, and then you stay there. And this is arguably what happened with Spitzer. There was a moment, I believe it was after he'd been elected, but he hadn't taken office yet, so it was November, December, and he was having a press conference to talk about all the great things he was going to do when he took office, and he told the reporters, you know what, I'm going to have hearings on the state budget. And somebody said, but Governor, they already do have hearings. He said, well, no, these are going to be real hearings. My commissioners are going to go to the legislature, and they're going to explain the budget to the legislature. And Governor, they do that already. He didn't, you know, he was Attorney General. He didn't focus on how the state budget works, so he didn't really know how it works. And that, the example that he gave, he didn't understand. He thought that editorial boards were going to change Shelley Silver's mind. I mean, maybe once in a while, but on this issue, the Speaker's real job, his constituency, is the members of the Assembly. And the public be damned in those situations, and this is one of them. And so that was an education for the governor, that he didn't have to that he didn't have to factor that into his calculations about how the fight over the controller was going to work.
Well, to talk about the first year, I think yesterday's results were in some respects a referendum on the first year. And I think it calls for very sober and objective analysis on my part. So can I just say, hallelujah! Free at last! We're almost free at last! You know, I gotta say that despite every problem, and I certainly think that Spitzer had, I totally agree with Bill and George on the complete mismanagement of, trying to pick your own controller. It's an abuse of power, a gross abuse of power. His first budget was a disaster. He bowed to Joe Bruno in that first budget. But I have never seen it, and I've been a critic of Spitzer almost throughout his public life. And I think he had an outstanding year. Nobody else in my years of covering Albany would stand up to the kind of pressure that he was put under by the Senate Republicans. Freddie Dicker was seen handing out leaflets in St. Lawrence County yesterday. This is a joke. This is a joke. They were a compilation of his own Troopergate clips, and nobody knew what he was talking about. I mean, the funny thing is about Troopergate is it's a downstate scandal. I don't think anybody, and I don't think it's a scandal, but I don't think anybody upstate has the foggiest idea what it is. And this is a district that's 70-40 Republican registration, and the Democrats win it. First time since
Those are not percentages.
No. 70,000 to 40,000. Bill is, he's the numbers man for Mike Bloomberg. So I just think he withstood enormous pressure. I think, Mario Cuomo, could we just go back to the golden age? Mario Cuomo was totally in the tank with the Senate Republicans for 12 years. Shelley Silver has been in the tank with the Senate Republicans for years. He would actively discourage members of his conference from running for state Senate seats that were winnable. He would offer them public bribes, committee appointments, more discretionary spending not to run because he had such a profound deal with Joe Bruno and the Senate Republicans. And now what do you have? Shelley Silver is actually serving up as a candidate, an Assembly Democrat, who was so respected in that district that he can win. So I think Eliot Spitzer is the change agent. Shelley Silver is now part of that change package. And look, maybe you think this is partisan talk. I don't blame you. But I don't really think it's partisan talk. We've had, as Andrew pointed out, you go back to 1935 since we last had a unified government. We know we have the most dysfunctional legislature in the United States, and we know it's been since 1966 that the Democrats control the Senate. Let's give something else a try. Let's see what happens, and let's hold everybody accountable. But let's see what happens if we actually have a Democratic majority. Let's give it a try. Then nobody has, the Democrats in the Assembly can't point, the governor can't point at the Senate Republicans and say they're the reason why no ethics reform passes. They're the reason why the school aid formula is so discriminatory. They're the reason why our tax structure is such a mess. They can't do that anymore. We can hold them accountable, and I think we're on the verge. We may not have to wait to November. Don't you think that there are guys crawling across the aisle even as we sit here? I mean, you could name several of them. They're on their hands and knees, just as Ellen was once on her hands. Elaine was once on her hands and knees. And so I think that the governor stood tall. He took enormous pressure, and yesterday was the byproduct